In a small house at the end of the village, amid the silent chill, a father and his daughter worked diligently, just as they did every day. TU TIEN's father sat in the corner, his gnarled hands nimbly weaving each broom from palm leaves. His eyes were dimmer than they once were, but his hands remained steady, as if they had never known fatigue. With every tight knot he tied, his eyes sparkled with faith, a belief in the peace that labor brings. TU TIEN quietly stepped behind the house, a bamboo basket swaying in her hand. She carefully picked each warm egg from the straw nest. "The chickens have laid so many eggs. We can't eat them all. You can take them to the market to sell," her father called out, his voice low but gentle. TU TIEN smiled, the tender smile of a girl accustomed to simple, yet deeply meaningful days. By the kitchen corner, a cluster of golden-ripe bananas, freshly cut by her father, hung from a hook. "Bananas are rare this season. They'll sell for a good price," he said, a glint of hope in his eyes. They sat together beside a warm pot of infused leaf water. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside their hearts, the sky was clear. TU TIEN slowly explained that she would have to go farther today because the nearby market had closed early. Her father didn't object, only reminding her, "Be careful on the road. Don't buy too much. We have enough to eat at home." The words seemed light, yet they held the simple, profound love of a father who always worried for his child and never for himself. She tidied the house and swept the yard to clear the rainwater. Before leaving, she didn't forget to remind her father, "Please help me build a trellis for the gourds this afternoon. The vines are climbing so high." Her father laughed, nodding, his voice soft but full of pride. "My daughter has grown up. She knows how to take care of everything." This single sentence made TU TIEN's heart feel so warm. She put on her conical hat and carried the basket of eggs out to the lane. The rain still fell, the ground was wet, and the path was slick, but her steps were light. In her heart was the image of her father sitting in the small kitchen, continuing to weave each broom with his whole heart. TU TIEN knew life might not be easy, but as long as her father was by her side, no rainstorm would ever be big enough to make her turn back. In the small house nestled at the end of a village road, TU TIEN's father maintained his familiar routine, working silently to forget his worries. He sat in the kitchen corner, his weathered hands quickly weaving brooms, but his eyes kept glancing out through the door's crack. Today was different. Something heavy weighed on his chest, a restless anticipation, a feeling he had tried to forget but which had now returned. He knew they would come, and just as he sensed, the sound of strange footsteps echoed on the wooden porch. Two unfamiliar men, dressed in dusty clothes, their sun-darkened faces shadowed by dark eyes, walked in casually, as if it were their own home. Without a word of permission or a hint of politeness, they sat down in front of him, as if they were old acquaintances. "Old man," one of them said with a sneer, his voice slow and sarcastic. "Living here is so peaceful, isn't it?" TU TIEN's father held his breath, his hands still weaving, but his heart felt like it would drop from his chest. He said nothing. The other man leaned closer, his voice cold. "You know why we're here, don't you? We don't like to repeat ourselves. If you want to see your daughter safe, you'd best not play dumb. My daughter has nothing to do with this. I've been home for days, not in contact with anyone," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm, but his back was drenched in sweat. The years of hiding were not enough to erase the old marks. He understood clearly, what had happened in the past would never truly disappear. At that moment, the door burst open. TU TIEN appeared in a thin raincoat, her hair still wet from a sudden shower. She had turned back because she had forgotten her wallet. As she stepped inside, she froze, seeing the two strange men sitting in the kitchen. The air was thick with tension. The two men glanced at each other, a flicker of surprise in their eyes, then quickly stood up. "We'll drop by another day, old man," one of them said with a twisted, meaningful smile, and they both vanished into the rain. TU TIEN turned to her father, her eyes filled with worry. "Who were they?" she asked, her voice filled with suspicion. Her father deflected, making up an excuse that they were just old acquaintances who had come to ask about some small matters. He smiled, but it was a twisted, forced smile, more silent than the rain on the porch. TU TIEN was quiet. She didn't ask further, but in her eyes, there was something like a faint scratch, thin, but it had reached deep into his heart. After she left, he sat staring blankly after his daughter's silhouette. The wind rushed in, making the pile of palm leaves at his feet rustle. The small house suddenly felt strangely cold. He held his head in his hands, leaning his back against the wooden wall, wondering how long it would be before he could tell her everything. TU TIEN was his daughter, not by blood, but by love and a long history of being together. But the truth was, those men didn't come to talk about the past. They came to reclaim a part of a memory he had buried deep. And this time, he felt it very clearly. They would return, and next time, it might not just be a threat. The new day had barely begun when Jack received an unexpected call from his mother. Her voice on the line was rushed and apologetic. Today was the day of his cousin's wedding back in their hometown, a major family event she had forgotten to mention. Unable to attend herself, she asked Jack to represent the family. She then gently suggested that he take TU TIEN along, as a simple way to introduce her to their relatives. Jack smiled softly, his heart stirring. The thought of bringing TU TIEN home had crossed his mind many times, but the right opportunity had never come up. Now, though sudden, if TU TIEN agreed, this trip would become more special than ever. Without hesitation, Jack immediately dialed her number. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. He sighed, slowly putting his phone away, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but no blame. He still prepared to set off alone, but halfway there, his hopeful anticipation made him unable to resist calling again. This time, he could clearly hear the noise from the other end. TU TIEN was at the market, amidst the bustling crowds and the lively sounds of vendors. She apologized for not answering, and Jack extended the invitation. "I'm on my way back home for my cousin's wedding. Mom said I should ask you to come along, if you're not busy." On the other end, TU TIEN was silent for a few seconds. Her voice, when it came, was sincere but full of regret. "I haven't prepared anything, and I've never been to a wedding or visited anyone's hometown. Besides, I'm busy selling eggs. I'm afraid I'll make you late." Jack heard the guilt in every word. He understood her, understood the hesitation of someone who had never stepped into the crowded, binding atmosphere of a large family. He wanted her to come, he truly did. But if she wasn't ready, he wouldn't force her. "Then, just be careful with your selling. We can go together some other time," he said gently, as if to soothe his own disappointment. After hanging up, Jack sat silently in his car for a few seconds. The empty space beside him seemed wider than usual. But his sadness didn't last long, because his love for TU TIEN was never something that could be easily shaken by a single refusal. Meanwhile, after the call, TU TIEN sat absently by her egg stall. She imagined Jack going home alone, having to face the familiar questions from his relatives, and her heart ached. If he had asked a little earlier, if today wasn't an important market day, if she hadn't been so worried about every single egg, maybe she would have gone with him, standing by his side as someone who truly belonged with him. But for now, she could only fold away that thought, force a smile, and continue with her daily work. She bent down to rearrange the eggs in the basket, calling out, "Fresh chicken eggs. Laid this morning, ma'am. Buy some for your grandchildren." She sold to a few familiar women, and then an elderly man stopped to buy a dozen. With each bag of eggs she handed over, her heart felt a little lighter, because she knew that even if she couldn't go with Jack today, the things she was doing, these small eggs, were also a part of the dream that she and Jack were quietly building together. The market was more crowded than usual that day. The sounds of vendors' calls, the rumble of carts, and the clatter of baskets created a chaotic yet familiar symphony. After selling the last basket of eggs, TU TIEN wiped the sweat from her forehead, a sense of relief settling in her heart. Today had been a success, not just because the eggs were all sold, but because in her hands was a packet of warm fried rice cakes and a few dark bongai, or spiny cakes, small gifts she had bought for her father, filled with a daughter's eagerness to bring something new to someone she loved. She had never eaten bongai before. The vendor had told her the cakes were made from glutinous rice flour with a filling of mashed mung beans and coconut, wrapped in fragrant chit leaves, and then steamed. They were served with thick sugarcane molasses, a sweetness that was not overpowering but seeped slowly into the throat. She bought two, just enough for a comforting afternoon snack. Returning home, she found her father sitting beside the gourd trellis he had just finished building. Ropes were stretched along the fence, and the small gourd vines had already begun to wrap themselves around the support as if in gratitude for their caretaker. Her father looked up when he saw his daughter, his eyes brightening. "Father, I bought something for you today," she said with a bright smile, holding out the still warm packet of cakes. "They call them bongai. I've never had them before, but everyone was buying them." He took the packet, gently unwrapping the outer chit leaves. The fragrant aroma of the creamy mung bean filling filled the air, mingling with the scent of the leaves and the sweet molasses. He took a bite, chewing slowly. "They're delicious. It's been a long time since I've had such a delightful new cake," he smiled. "Next time you go to the market, remember to buy a few more." TU TIEN felt an unfamiliar joy. It wasn't about the cakes, but about the genuine smile on her father's weather-worn face. As they sat together, eating the cakes and drinking water, she told him about the phone call that morning. About Jack inviting her to his cousin's wedding and how she had refused, not wanting to delay him, and because she had never traveled far or been introduced to anyone like that. She felt worried, shy, and not ready. He listened in silence, occasionally nodding. Then he spoke softly, his words as light as a breeze. "There are some opportunities that, if we don't take them, we'll never know what awaits us. My daughter has grown up. Don't let fear stop you from being with the person you love." She lowered her head.
Bệnh tật mãn tính hoặc đau đớn có thể khiến người ta cảm thấy cô đơn hoặc buồn tủi. Tâm lý trầm cảm, lo lắng hoặc các vấn đề về tâm lý khác dẫn đến các cảm giác buồn và lý tử điệp. Cảm giác buồn và cô đơn kéo dài, thiếu động lực để và hứng thú với các hoạt động thường ngày, cô lập bản thân với người khác và tránh các hoạt động của xã hội, giấc ngủ kém và mất ngủ, chế độ ăn uống kém hoặc thiếu dinh dưỡng. Cách đối phó thứ nhất là tìm sự hỗ trợ từ bạn bè, gia đình hoặc các chuyên gia tâm lý, tham gia hoạt động xã hội, kết nối với người khác, tập thể dục thể thao thường xuyên để cải thiện tâm trạng và sức khỏe, thực hành và ngồi thiền để giảm căng thẳng, cải thiện tâm trạng,